Okay, hello and welcome to the Node Operators Roundtable. Today is December 13th, 2023, coming to a close on 2023 and heading into 2024. We're going to talk about Leap 5.0 RC3, which was released just last week, and folks have begun to roll out on API nodes in particular. We're also going to talk about the plan for going to stable on 5.0, and we'll briefly cover updates on 6.0, instant finality being the sort of headline feature there. And then we will go into some sort of community topics around history solutions and the recent high volume driver of inscriptions. And from there, we will see what sorts of interesting threads we weave. So starting with 5.0, RC3 went sort of available on, let's see, it was Thursday of last week. I don't know what date that is. And again, even prior to that, folks had, in particular, Matthew Darwin from EOS Nation had sort of kicked the tires quite a bit on that. It is available now, and we've seen some community engagement and sort of encouragement for people to go ahead and deploy that for non-block producing nodes, in particular API nodes, that sort of thing. We're not seeing a ton of feedback on issues there. We've seen a couple of small minor things that don't appear to be new issues with 5.0, rather just things we're noticing that have been there prior. So far so good. With that, we don't believe that we'll be needing a fourth release candidate, so we're still on track for stable. So again, if you're on this call and you haven't kicked the tires at all with RC3, I encourage you to do so either informally or even actually deploying in a production but non-block production context. And then the plan for stable is that we will sort of promote basically the exact release we have now. We might put some very minor changes in there for fixing small issues, but there's nothing there that would be substantial or change behavior in a meaningful way. And so that would be just after the new year. So we'll be looking at within the first couple of weeks of January. Again, pending any reports of more significant issues that we haven't foreseen, which again is why we encourage folks to run with 5.0 RC3 currently, because that's the only way that if there is some issue that we would discover it really at this point, because we do believe it to be most likely a stable version. So before I move off of 5.0, I did want to sort of open for comments. So if anybody has anything to add on 5.0, including, just sort of a hand raising of yeah, I've deployed this, or, hey, actually, I have seen an issue that I haven't, submitted a bug for yet, or, anything about release notes, anything at all.
I put on my first wax test net node last night. So
very good. No issues.
Well, you said very good before I told you the results.
Oh, good point.
I think it's good regardless, even if it blew up.
Yeah, true. All right, go ahead. Tell me the results.
Seems fine.
Yeah, very good. Cool. So no issues applying, sort of the custom patches or anything like that to get your wax builds.
Well, that was Stan, so.
Oh, okay.
I just took his.
He didn't know. He just slapped it together and dropped it out there. He even said, "I don't know if it works or not."
Well,
Matthew will figure that out.
so I tested it.
Yeah. Cool.
So it does
We
work. Applied the same build process as the main EOS, and away it goes.
We've rolled it on Jungle and Kylan. I will probably look at pushing it to the rest of our testnet nodes, including block production. Why not? They don't need deferred transactions anyway. So just to see how folks custom contracts and things like that might work as well. So for its production.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that one topic that I had meant to discuss that was in my other notes that you've just sort of reminded me on is whether basically when and whether we should coordinate doing oh my gosh, words are escaping me. I was going to use my words. What were they? Protocol upgrades for in particular deferred transaction removal, but also BLS on a jungle environment or any other test in that environment.
Well, I believe we should do that, because we're at final RC3, right? So we should do that now before we get to final.
Right. Kevin, do you have any perspective here on considerations for doing a protocol upgrade on a test net?
No.
Okay. I mean, I think I asked this question in Jungle channel like a week or two ago, but I didn't get any.
I think the big thing was we were waiting on the new crypto for BLS thing, right? It was a new feature. So.
Yep.
Yeah, so we have that now, and I think everybody's upgraded to 5.0 RC3 because I don't see any of that early block produced warnings, which was typical of the RC2. So I think we should be good to go from a block producer point of view. I don't know if all the consumers are ready with 5.0. Like, is EOS EVM on the tests working fine with 5.0 on Jungle?
Good question. I haven't looked at that. I will check in with Steven and Arig and others to see if that's something we've looked at. So
we're still testing Firehose with 5.0, so we didn't upgrade the Firehose diffuse nodes yet.
All right. That sounds like a good thing to test for those purposes as well. Okay, so it sounds like generally though there is a consensus that we should proceed with activating the protocol features on Jungle for the 5.0 RC3, prior to stable. So what steps do we need to take from a community perspective to push that forward?
I think we just need to send pitchforks to Crypto Alliance guys and tell them to activate the protocol features. They have God mode, right? So they can just do it. Saves voting.
Any reason, Kevin, why this needs to be like a Jungle 4 or Jungle 5, whatever version we're on, or just do it on the same current?
We're not creating a new jungle. We're just activating features on the existing jungle.
Right.
Yeah, there won't be a Jungle 5 unless something goes wrong. So,
Okay, good. I see. That makes sense. Cool. And what do you think is the appropriate channel for those pitchforks? Should we do a DMs or like a jungle channel or just the Antelope Node Operators channel?
Think in the jungle channel.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of a jungle 5, we should probably test double block production. Let me go change some settings real quick.
Go ahead. Trigger all the alerts on my dashboard.
Yeah, there you go, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Michael's like, ooh, a chance to try to break something.
That's how I poisoned the jungle 2 or jungle 3. That's how I did it.
Cool. Yeah. Let's hit it with some disasters. Get some forks going.
Yep.
Forks, wrong blocks, out of sequence. I don't know.
Yep. Excellent.
There you go. Let's see. That should start lighting up. Which one dings louder, Matthew? The early blocks or the double signing?
Double signing.
Yeah, no, I figured.
Because double signing triggers a bunch of things like block not applied, fork, double signing. Typically you get multiple alerts at once.
Yeah. What's it take to get jungle 4 on blocks instead of jungle 3?
So you need to care about blocks. Last I heard quoted was $60,000 a month.
Oh, okay. All right.
Something crazy.
So not happening. That's what I'm hearing. Okay.
I think they're mostly focused on Metallicus.
But you can
have
use
like a Hyperion and
dot blocks, right? And point
exactly.
at your own Hyperion.
Local dot blocks, is that what you're saying? Yeah, that's how a lot of us get around it, is it still allows you, and local dot blocks allows you to specify your own API, token, Hyperion, whatever. Fun fact, if you use Hyperion, it might reverse the order of the transactions, but it allows you to get by. I don't know. I mean, there's Telos has an open source block explorer. I mean, maybe we need to think about getting that spun up.
Well, I mean, the monitor on Jungle's fine, I guess. I just noticed that the blocks one was the old one.
Oh, I just went unlinkable. Huh. Oh, it's mad. Oh, it's synced back up though. Yeah. It's not happy. But it did sync up. It didn't go off in La La Land. Anyway.
Yeah, we'll let that hook some, turn up the pressure on it. But just to sort of reiterate, yeah, I will sort of send messages in the jungle channel to ask CryptoLines about doing protocol upgrades. I'll reach out to other folks at ENF about EOS EVM and just making sure everything seems to be happy there with 5.0 RC3. And Michael is testing double signing on blocks. And Matthew, if you could take a look at the fire hose stuff and make sure that everything's happy there.
Yarrow's working on that.
Cool. Excellent. And then again, just, planning for within the first 2 weeks of January, assuming no unforeseen problems that require another release candidate. All right, so on to 6.0. We continue to make progress on our sort of, prototype phase on some of the redesign that we've been working through. Things are going well there. I'm currently working on detailed plan for proposed timelines for enabling and activating, which would include both sort of our initial plan and some sort of contingencies, so that we can have some well communicated dates, and people have expectations on when this would happen. I'm still working on that. There's going to probably be like feedback cycles internally on that before we roll it out. But my current guess would be that prior to the end of January, the folks from the ENF will begin reaching out to communicate and get feedback on those plans. So that's really all I have on 6.0 and instant finality. If anybody has questions on that, I can't guarantee that I can answer them, but I will certainly note them and take them back to the team. So I will leave some moments here for anybody to speak up if they have any 6.0 topics they'd like to learn about in the future. All right. So moving on, we should get into some discussion on either history solutions or the inscription sort of event that recently occurred. Any sort of votes on which topic we cover first? All right, so I'll just take them in the order that they came in, and we'll talk about history solutions for Leap or rather EOS Network. And in particular, Michael, you raised some concern about there not being enough Hyperion nodes, and you perhaps are the only Hyperion node provider at this point. I think is the assertion that you made. Do you want to sort of kick us into this conversation?
Is it that time?
Yep.
All right. Had just happened to be I talked with Avril over at Alcor, which is the main DEX on kind of all the antelope chains, and a lot with the IBC solution that's going back and forth between the chains, which relies on a history solution to validate proofs or blocks or something. I don't know what along the line, but obviously we're running the IBC services. But what's happening is there's not many public Hyperion or history solution providers out there. I know Rio ran Hyperion on EOS, but apparently it was having issues. And then there's Diffuse with Nations, and Greymass has Frankenstein or Robotron or whatever they call it. But like I say, there's very few public history instances available, and of course it's a monstrosity to try to even figure out how to get it online. So they realized that once our nodes started getting smashed and rate limiting and throttling, the IBC bridge shut down and there's no other nodes to use. So like I say, not really a technical issue, but I'm right here. I'm a top 21 VP with Hyperion. So that's what I'm doing. So
anyway. Just for the record, ours is still up. Like we did, somebody alerted us to some problem with EOS. So it's back up. It was just like the node crashed and wasn't keeping up. But I tested it since, and it's working as expected. Also, just for the record, IBC could use state history, Hyperion, or MindReader, or like basically Firehose actually directly. And these are like the three options, and it actually needs it to get the proper action receipt digest that's been produced in the block at the block producer level, not what you get from the API. So like it could even be reduced, like the IBC code in a way that it only relies on still a history solution, but not for every block, because that's currently like, say for like the light proof, we just need a normal node and like a normal we just need really the hash of the block itself to continue building like the active Merkle nodes that we keep track of. So just letting you know that IBC will still always, in a way now, require a history solution, but it could be reduced a lot, like what you need from it. So it is like you still need all the data as far back as you want to be able to prove a block. just to give more context.
So am I right to understand that what you're saying is that the state, and for that matter, even the contents of the block, is not what is relevant, but rather just the hash? Like you need
that is only for the live proof DB where that is relevant. But when you need to prove a specific action, we need to access the action receipt digest as well as the action receipt digest of the other actions in that block. So like be able to compute the correct, forget the correct terminology here, but like the correct, basically compressed path to the correct node. In a nutshell, we still need access to full history.
So you need,
as far back as a block you need to prove. So right, if you're only interested in proving something like like in the last 7 days, obviously you can have like a rolling or an auto like cleanup process basically to manage the size of your database. You don't need to be running it from block 0. We have a way to bootstrap the Lightproof DB, which figures out, depending where you want to start, it will only fetch it does rely on like a fire hose, this one, to bootstrap a chain. So at the end of the day, like to bootstrap a chain, you need to be able to fetch all the kind of anchor blocks, all the different like path of blocks that you need to be able to prove starting from a certain block. And that we do, it takes like 30 seconds to fetch it from a public fire hose, like say EOS Nation's one for any chain. So you still actually need to rely on a history solution, at least, but the idea is you would be able to rely on a slow public history solution without necessarily impacting performance, because it'd be used just very sparingly.
So do you technically need a history solution, or could you just use the Git block, V1 chain Git block?
It doesn't have the action receipt digest. It doesn't have the action receipt. It doesn't have, from what I remember, it doesn't have any of this stuff. Even the trace history, I believe, was missing some data we needed in it.
Right. Yeah.
And we need it at the producer level, and like not anything returned by the API, of course.
Right. Right. You need each action receipt, not just the just not the Merkle root.
Yes.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. We should add that to the trace API. I thought we had done that, but maybe not. I mean, maybe it doesn't matter if you guys are just using other history solutions, but
yeah, there's state history, for example, one could use,
right,
or Hyperion, but they all have not additional steps from the user, but there's additional things that need to be calculated, because like Hyperion, from what last I checked, wasn't calculating the correct way or hashing the correct way to get the action receipt digest, which is not returned by it. So there's some additional code, but it doesn't matter. As soon as you set your history solution, you can get that. And for the one when you use Robo, the one for EOS Gray Mass, most of that actually, we talked to them and they made sure they could provide, because it's still internal to them, and they made sure they can provide the exact stuff we need, and then we calculate anything missing with the enough data we have.
Okay. One heads up there for 6.0 for instant finality, we're actually looking at changing the way we calculate those Merkle roots. So currently they fold in a left and right bit flip to know which side you're on. That's not needed, and it's not compatible with the way Bitcoin does it, for example. And so we're just going with like a strict, like a normal Merkle root calculation after activation of instant finality.
Okay, perfect.
Some education here for myself. When we say action receipt, are these basically Merkle leaves, like, or is it something else?
Well, an action receipt is like a transaction receipt, but it's at the action level. It's a collection of data that's generated in the execution of an action.
Okay, so it's the actual.
There's a digest associated. There's a
ahead.
digest associated with that gets folded up into the action root Merkle that's part of the block header, which then becomes part of the block ID, which is the hash of all that.
And so was Shaq saying that he needs the full action receipt or just the digest for an action receipt?
From what I remember, I could just calculate the receipt digest from the action receipt if I have all the data, including like the global, the orders, all that stuff as it came out from the producer, of course, not the API, which will do its own sorting and ordering. And then I remember I have to resort a few things like the scope of accounts, or some things need to be ordered in a certain way to make sure I can hash everything and get the correct action receipt digest that I usually compare with diffuse with like.
So I'm confident that that's true, but I'm asking about this from the other angle too, of just like I'm wondering what the absolute lightest weight potential service for somebody to provide that would meet the needs of IBC, for instance, might be, right?
Yeah, so we do calculate action receipt digest if it's not provided to us through the history. So we calculate it from the receipt itself, like a complete receipt.
Right.
We edit we sort the auth sequence and just manipulate it to fit what we expect. And as long as we have the receiver digest, global sequence, auth sequence, and ABI sequence from the producer, produce that block, and we have basically their action receipt, we're able to produce the correct action receipt digest from.
Yeah. I guess what I'm wondering is whether it would make sense for there to be some service that only required the node running the service to have like the log of the digests, not the original sort of raw data, if you will, and provided an endpoint that you could basically get a proof, like given a action, get a proof that it was included in the block or in a block, right?
Yeah, if you have all the action receipt digests and then you have a way to link it to the actual action that the user is trying to prove, because the user still you need to link those two. So if you don't have the action receipt or a reference, so you're still storing the TXID or other things, and you could definitely make it so it only requires the current node, which it already does in Robo. Most of the things are fetched. Like Lightproof now completely, for example, uses just node EOS and just does get block ID basically, and just keeps all the active Merkle nodes for each block, and when it can be removed, we track when we can actually remove it from the history if we've passed a certain block and you don't want to prove past a certain 2 to the power
of. Going back a few steps, just thinking about sort of a root cause question. Michael, what you asserted is that there's very few public history solutions out there, and I wanted to sort of maybe open the topic of speculation on why that might be. Like, what might be the root cause of why there aren't more?
Teams aren't getting smaller.
You want a speculation as to why there's not more public history solutions?
Yep.
There's no incentive really to do it for most people. I mean, it's not an easy task. It's not a cheap task. And there's no mechanism to encourage anyone to do that.
Yep.
That's a whole nother can of worms, maybe a different.
Not to mention that you get spammed all the time and abused.
Yeah, that's what I'm working with Avril right now on the EOS Hyperion nodes to try to unlock it. And he hits my rate limits pretty quick. And then as soon as I unlock it, it's just getting smashed so hard. I mean, it's catching a couple thousand a minute, it looks like. So, I mean, it just starts bogging down and throwing 429s. So, even the public solutions that we offer just have to get throttled because people are running bots for Alcor, ironically, and just smashing the shit out of it. Or I don't know what the hell they're doing, but I can tell you that's a lot of what they're doing. Get table rows and push transactions and then get transactions.
Right.
But like
So
I say, anyway, it's not a technical issue, but it's technical because there's no way to easily provide history solutions. Therefore, nobody does it. And they are getting smaller and smaller availability.
Yep. So I want to speculate on one more possible one, and it's sort of calling to Seth's question here. So he says, where are the top 21 ESBPs with their Hyperion nodes? There should be at least 10 from the top 21 running. So one commentary on that is that I think that also there's not necessarily alignment on what the right history solution that everybody should be providing is. So there's some fragmentation, right, as well. You could argue, for example, that EOS Nation is, I mean, this is not even argument, it's fact, right? EOS Nation is providing some variation on history solution as well, right? Yeah, and so I agree that even if you take the combined set of all the different types of history solutions, there's, you could maybe make the argument that there's not enough, but it's at least a slightly rosier picture, right? And if there was some alignment on those solutions, it might look a little better. So, because it sounds like,
it also depends what people are trying to get out of it, right? Like, for example, for everything that we do in production, like most, I believe, they don't rely on public nodes. We'll run our own trimmed history for our needs that we might index to, like a database, and we don't need to like store all the history of everything. It's really like, even for IBC, you can have it auto trim like the Lightproof DB and like just keep and then delete your, like merged blocks or whatever it is, that's the older data that you might not ever need to reference again. So I think the public, when we talk about public, I think we're talking here about like full blockchain data, like kind of like what EOS Nation and EOS USA run. And that one is more, I think, like, I don't know what people could use it for anything, but if it's public, it's not going to be as fast as running your local when querying it. So I'm thinking just to check certain things historically once in a while. But I know, of course, I know there's many cases of abuse, but at least that's what is needed outside what you can do for 90% of 99% probably of the people who just need the last maybe week of history.
Yep. I think there's another angle on this too, right? Which is the incentives and the difficulty or cost in time or money or whatever are kind of two sides of the same coin, right? Like if this is a no-brainer to run, then potentially even avoiding or potentially even ignoring economic incentives, it might be kind of a, well, why not? I'm already running a node, right? But I think, to the point, it's very costly. I think that the other angle is when we talk about incentives, there's perhaps incentive alignment is another issue here, right? Like there's the economic side of things of like, how do I get paid for this, right? Is maybe one way to look at it, but also it strikes me that, what am I trying to say? That there's a couple different things at play here, right? There's having the data available to you that you would want to prove for the purposes of IBC or something else, right? And then there's also having the data available to you that you need to prove, right? Like proof data, and those are potentially right now. I think they're one and the same, but they're potentially different things. I think I'm talking around the issue and maybe losing everybody in the process. I'm wondering if there's a way that we could make it lightweight for people who, for people to hold just the data that is interesting to them, like this is the raw data, right? And then for sort of the broader, like top 21, for example, to hold just the data, like all of the data, but only what is relevant for proving, and not like the comprehensive raw data. Does that make any sense at all? Or am I just sort of doing a lot of this?
Well, I mean, you need different amounts of history for different amounts of different problems, right? So I think if we look at the original design for Diffuse and Hyperion, it was like store everything, which is obviously very expensive, right? Mm-hmm. So, but if you start building things that exclude certain amounts of history, then all of a sudden you need more solutions that are targeted at, unique, pain points. So, hey,
like in IBC, we need on block.
Right. We need here's the IBC history solution. Here's the account lookup, token lookup API solution. Here's the, whatever. So that they're more targeted solutions rather than let's store all actions and all transactions from all 300 million blocks.
Yep.
Right. So, that's why we spent a lot of time on substreams, because substreams allows you to write the code that just, hey, I want this.
Right.
You write the code for exactly what you want, and then you can store it in whatever database you want and put an API on top of it. And, there's a whole stack to do that. You can just Docker compose up, write your substream, Docker compose up, and you have a whole stack with an API, and it just works. So, so then you start building these little custom solutions, which then ideally you want the person who needs it to pay for it. Right. But then they're just paying for what they want and not. Anyway, it's hard to charge people for everything. And then because people look at them. EOS Nation, your diffuse solution is too expensive. Yeah, it's too expensive because we're storing all this stuff that you don't want. But, we didn't have a way to build a custom thing for you. So anyway, that's the direction we're going. Custom APIs for custom solutions. Is there a substream for IBC? I don't know. Could make one. Would be easy.
I do agree that substreams is a size state history. I would consider the next best, basically built on Firehose. So, which is DeepMind, which is fully integrated and probably the most kept up to date alongside state history. And the most flexible in my eyes, because it provides all the data, as a Firehose server itself. And then you combine that with substreams. And now instead of piping that whole data across the network, you're literally just, running as if like a function on it that's manipulating or, extracting certain data on each block. So if you're talking about maybe you were hinting at block producers need to run some type of access to data. If it has to do with history, my vote would be Firehose, and ideally allow substreams on it.
Yeah, so maybe the requirement would be, you need to run history that keeps the last 7 days or something. Is that a reasonable amount of, history for most apps? Right. So I tried to start this conversation before about why do I need to support get block from get block 1000 on EOS? Does anybody really need get block 1000? I don't know. Seems like I'm storing a lot of data that nobody needs. So it'd be nice to just 7 days is enough. Trim the rest.
Right, but because if you want to get block 1000, you might as well start your node from scratch, like a local node. You're just gonna have a much better experience.
Yeah, I don't know.
You get the option to truncate and snapshots and everything.
But we never came to a consensus on what is the right amount of history that public APIs should serve.
Well, the public always says everything, because the public includes every use case.
Well, if public wants everything, then public gets nothing because it's hard to run everything.
Of course, yeah.
So if you wanted to start from zero,
I mean, I would still keep all the blocks on my peer-to-peer node, or maybe a public block download node.
Right.
But I wouldn't necessarily shove it on every API node.
Also, like having the node, like it's a bit adjacent, but like if you have the node reporting, like get info reports, additional thing, like, hey, maybe we're advertising that we are running a ship or fire hose or anything on this port, and then we can query it and find out what range of blocks or data it has. Then you can make some type of solution like a front end that basically can feed in like 10 nodes, or you feed in the 21 public, say, API list, and then based on where you're located, can go to the fastest one, or based on the data you want, might be slower, but at least you have a way to retrieve it with more load balanced across people, and not everybody has to have all the data.
Yeah, get info already returns the first block available. It was a feature request that I don't know, someone asked for, maybe me.
Well, I don't think this is one of the topics that we will be able to close with a clear next step at this point. So I propose that we do move on to the discussion on inscriptions. But before we do, sort of a last call, if anybody has proposed next steps, I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, we'll just kind of marinate on this topic for a bit.
Well, I mean, I can tell you what we're doing internally at Nation, which is to promote substreams. So we've got substreams on all the Antelope chains that we're running, except Ultra, because they have their own weird binary, which we don't have support for. But the other ones are running, and substreams are compatible across many different blockchains. Ethereum, Near, Cosmos, whatever. So, we're hoping to get more developers into the Antelope tech stack by giving them a common tool set. Oh, you're used to doing it here. Oh, you can do it here. And then we'll be doing substreams for EOS EVM as well. I know Steven's excited to hear about that.
So all of that's good news. Is there any call to action in that for either the ENF or other node operators?
ENF fund other node operators to offer the same. I don't know.
Or write some documentation, examples,
Yeah.
I don't know. Sorry. What were you saying, Shaq? I missed what you said.
No, saying on top of having some public nodes, if you're itching to do something about substreams, is like maybe some documentation, some more examples for different use cases. I know there are already, but expanding on that makes it easier for people to get in. And I do want to add though that, like, in my experience, I've tried Hyperion. After I've dealt with state history, I've dealt with like almost every Chronicle, diffuse, and in my experience, the most stable, feature-rich, and easy to use. State history is not like fun necessarily. Was basically Firehose, like Firehose, and of course its derivatives, like everything else. But that's it's kind of too big now, and it's not supported anymore. But yeah, for me, it was like the most versatile and stable. I know you're going to say Michael hates it, but
I'm not going to say hates it, but knowing Hyperion by far more intimately, obviously, I'm much more comfortable with that and the way that it functions versus
I mean, it's
piping Node OS out to standard out and ingesting them one block at a time. I get it. It's a far superior product because it was developed for a lot of other use cases. Hyperion was much more designed to be a hammer that fits everything. Anyway, go ahead, Matthew.
No, I was just going to say, your experience with what you already know, infers
Right.
with, what you're comfortable to run. So this is I had the exact same conversation with somebody else. This Firehose thing, this was on Ethereum, is too complicated to run. And then I'm like, but you know how to run all this other stuff. And then they're like, oh yeah, right. I just spent 2 years doing that. So that's why I'm comfortable with it. So 5 minutes after starting Firehose, I'm uncomfortable. Well,
if it were less
fine.
clunky, to have to kind of get the Node OS side of it, that's a lot where, state history may be a big fire hose of poop, but at least it's more standard and kind of usable as opposed to diffuse whenever I restarted, or fire hose. I don't want Seth to tell me. When you restart
Firehose
it,
is stateless, or like it doesn't have anything. Like Firehose, you can restart it as much as you want. It's more the mind reader, which is basically an instrumented node EOS that is producing the 1-block files, and then you have the merger that is merging this data into 100-block files. The Firehose is more like a service that runs on top. It's not like necessarily should not have issues if you restart it. But go ahead, I'm sure you found issues.
No. I mean, it's more the clunkiness of how Node OS, it was kind of bolted in and hijacked, and it never really got refined, in my opinion, right? It could probably be made much easier instead of having to run it in the type of environment that currently it exists. We're having to figure out how to pipe it out, and you launch that mind reader node without the right settings, and in about an hour it'll crush a 1 terabyte drive. I mean, you got to know what the hell you're doing. It could be
if you don't start the
easier.
merger, you're gonna have a fun time with millions of 1-block files.
If you don't set up Hyperion right, it's going to screw you too. I mean,
exactly.
So that's why I say. But the good news is that I do think a lot of the clunkiness actually, and what's something that could be done about it, right? A lot of that probably could be polished up on the how to run the node and really kind of have it prepped for a diffuse style of mode versus having to know how to use that mind reader in the right way, and even launching it. I mean, I played hell trying to get that damn thing to launch and not be on my console, So
you want a Docker compose up, and then just it works.
I ain't a Docker shop, but something more like state history, right? No, whenever I fire up state history, I say, here's where the snapshot says start, go. And then there's a WebSocket that says connected. Bob's your uncle. It's not nearly that simple from the node side of it.
Not as simple.
So that's why I say it probably,
because they delete your data, restore snapshot correctly, diffuse, and manage node EOS for you. I'll say simpler, but yeah.
Anyway,
we're arguing.
No. That's why it's a feature thing, is that the clunkiness of diffuse, you're right, isn't so much on the ingesting side. Diffuse is pretty solid. There's some 100 blocks. Let's rock and roll, baby. Or Firehose. Sorry, not diffuse. To me, the clunkiness was actually the Node OS side, and it's just because it really wasn't fully baked out, right?
So if you want to have a Firehose with less data, then you can use the new RPC polar feature, which just does get block, get transaction, whatever, and then build a Firehose from that. You'll get a lot less rich data, but this is how some Ethereum EVM chains are being instrumented. This is how we'll do EOS EVM.
There's some things like table row changes or DB operations and things of the sort that is only part of DeepMind, as far as I understand. There's some stuff from Diffuse that you can only access from within DeepMind that's now fully part of Node EOS, since a while ago. So that data, like, how are you going to get it out? Are you going to write like a whole other service for it? Like, as far as I'm concerned, it's very well integrated. Maybe what you mean is the other parts of Diffuse, kind of after you consume it, what you do with it, that could be potentially updated, but that's what EOS Nation, at least part of what they've been doing.
Yeah, DeepMind is the only solution that provides action level instrumentation there. That's the only solution that does that. SHIP doesn't provide that.
Does that bring us full circle back to the official event solution discussion, or is that kind of unrelated?
Yeah, we've talked about the fact that like, deep fuse could be implemented on top of an event environment that's part of Node.js that would potentially allow people to do other things to those events besides just deep mining.
which would work fine.
Shaq, I did want to follow up. You said about Firehose and substreams. You made a couple comments that I wanted to dig into. You said it's too big now and not supported. Could you give a little bit more color on what you mean by those?
I'm not sure I said that under what context, because what do you mean it's too big? Like the data?
I might have misheard you, but I thought you said that Firehose had a lot of advantages, but it was too big and
the fuse is too big, not Firehose.
Oh, diffuse, I was saying, which is the rest of the diffuse stack, includes Firehose, which is basically, you could say, the lightest thing, as it just talks to these merged blocks. But then on top of that, if you want to have access, you need to have their state DB if you want to access basically the state of every table at every block. So you can retrieve, say, the state at any block, and you want to have the transactions DB and multiple indices and all these eat subspace, CPU, and it's very hard to manage on, like, say, one powerful server.
So what you're saying is it's too big because it is producing full state at every block. That's what you're saying.
All states, all transactions, all indexed, all everything for all time.
Yeah, like already the merge blocks has that. The merge blocks has literally those 100 block files that has all the blocks, including even the fourth blocks that any of the nodes feeding it have seen, just so it can manage it's like cursor, so that you can undo blocks and undo actions, and that's how it knows them. Just in case somebody disconnects, say, while in the middle of a stream, they lose internet, and they're on a forked block or a block that gets forked, that data will be part of the merge block, so you can basically undo, get back to the common point, and then go back on the correct chain, roll forward on the correct chain. So that kind of data is already part of the merge blocks that you need for Firehose. The merge block you can just delete, literally, if you want to delete, they're like every 100 block file is stored as one file, I believe, in protobuf.
Matthew, does that go to your point then about what a use case specific substreams instead of
Okay. Right, because how many people need to be able to get the exact state delta of something that happened in 2018?
Right.
Nobody. But the fuse stores it, right? Which is why it's huge.
There's the police.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. The police can give us $10 million a year to run the thing.
They can run their own. They probably are. No, I'm just kidding.
I'll run it for them. Holla at me.
But anyway, you need to pay for. The point is, if you want that, then you need to pay for it. It's fine, but the average DApp doesn't care about that.
And as long as there's enough people with full blocks or access to full blocks, anybody can run a node and history solution from scratch and do it that way.
And then, Shaq, about not supported, what did you mean by
that? I might have lost you. What's not supported?
So I think you also made the comment that it was not supported. It might have been in the context of defuse rather than Firehose and substreams, or maybe...
Right? Yeah, like outside. So outside the merger, or like DeepMind first. DeepMind is the component that's inside Node EOS now, and is the one that's outputting this data. So it is like at applied like different stages, it's outputting logs directly to be consumed. So that's always updated and obviously maintained by ENF, and any changes to Node EOS incorporate DeepMind changes. On top of this, you have, I guess it will go under different names, like kind of like a mind reader kind of node, something that's going to consume this data, or like it's just called reader, I think, in the EOS Nation version. And then you have this Firehose also, basically service that talks to these merge blocks. Outside those three, Firehose is basically being updated to work by EOS Nation. Outside those, as far as I can tell, and of course substreams, outside those, nothing of the old diffuse is maintained. So not the transaction DB, not the state DB, not the indexes, and not EOSQ, the block explorer. Maybe API cache is updated. I'm not sure. But as far as I can tell, none of these are even getting updated moving forward. So really, like, Firehose will still work, and now substreams will work, and that's really the more efficient way for most users to get the data they need.
Yeah, I'll take this opportunity to plug substreams. I spent literally just a couple hours last night, just first look at it and getting it running, and it was drop dead simple. And I mean, I didn't do anything more than like what I could have done with EOSQ so far, but I mean, it was simple to, like, you know, I just, like, I want to find all the EOS EVM call actions, you know, over the last, you know, over the weekend. And, you know, it was easy to just do that and have it spit all that out to you, which was pretty cool.
Excellent.
Awesome. Great to hear. I love hearing people's experiences. I know substreams is a little bit to get going because there's this little learning curve. Well, maybe bigger than little learning curve for at least some people. But, you know, if you're comfortable in C++, then, you know, you can learn a little bit of Rust and
it wasn't bad at all. You know, in terms of like just using what's even just canned already was pretty straightforward. And, you know, after I figured out like where things were at, then it was just like, oh, fire up this command and you get what you want. And then, yeah, and then like it's pretty simple if you want to just modify the Rust code yourself and have it provide you whatever you want, which I'm looking forward to doing some more with that because that's just very powerful.
I love when you said, for at least some people, Matthew, Michael looked like you just called him Cletus the slack-jawed yokel or something.
No, I include, you know, a lot of people, including myself. You know, I have not written a substream.
It's difficult for some people.
Michael.
No, but there's you know, it's like, oh, it's in Rust. Oh, I only know JavaScript. Oh, I have to learn stuff, right? So there's
I only know Bash. So yeah, all the Bash.
Yeah, exactly. So I only know Perl, you know. So you know, you got to get over that, you know, bump, and then you're good. So I will say writing substreams on Antelope is way easier than writing substreams for an EVM chain. EVM chains.
And realistically, if you have like a few examples, it's easy for most users to adapt it to their needs because really most users are just going to stream either specific actions or specific, you know, table changes or something, and then you have a generic thing when they just change like the names of the contracts and they're good to go.
Yeah,
right. So there's a for loop for the transactions. There's a for loop for the actions. All you got to know is like what the protobufs are for each of those. And then once you have that, like once you take those pieces of data, okay, here's a protobuf for transactions. Here's a protobuf for actions. Here's a for loop that loops over all of that. We'll just add to the for loop what you want, and you're done. Like you get what you need.
I think the other interesting thing about substreams, and I haven't, of course, tried to use it in any sort of technical capacity. So this is me looking at the sort of marketing materials and documentation, but is the parallelizability of it and the composability of it, right? So you can sort of take substreams and kind of mash them together to form new substreams, which is interesting. So kind of a...
And for us, the best feature was that you're no longer relaying from your Firehose server all this data through Firehose, which is the biggest really like bandwidth killer. You're really sending every single block with all the unnecessary data, so you can do that filtering and manipulation on your local whatever local server is receiving it. So that's like the huge thing, because it's like if it's on a path machine, it's almost instant. You're getting results that span a large, you know, time period, and only the actions you want almost instantly. It's great.
Yeah, and you get a terabyte free a month apparently, which I don't know if that's measured on what it's processing on the back end or what it's returning. If it's measured on what it's returning, then that's a huge amount of...
It's measuring what's processed on the back end.
Oh, okay. Well, shucks. Oh well. Still, it's still generous though.
Once it's cached, though, then it will measure the cached amount. So somebody else run the substream first, then when you go to run it, it will.
I did notice, like, the
data it
second
already
time I ran
has.
it over a range, it was super fast. I guess
Yeah,
because
it's just
all
returning
cache.
the cache data. It's
Yeah,
all
I
it
mean
does.
that was amazing. It's like, oh, that's really cool.
So we are already over time, but inscriptions is kind of a hot and recent topic. So I'm willing to run over a little bit. I don't have any expectation that others will be able to. So if you need to drop, go ahead. We'll see if we still have a quorum. We can let's say that we'll end this no matter what in 11 minutes. And let's see what we can get into in that time. So inscriptions, any particular, who wants to give sort of an introduction to this topic, explaining what happened and why it might be interesting for node operators?
Well, I'm not sure I can introduce the inscriptions themselves. It seems to be some sort of mining related thing. I don't have the background, but the long and short of it, it creates a lot of transactions on the chain.
Yeah, I can give you my flawed understanding because I've not spent a lot of time understanding it myself. But from what I understand, you can think of it kind of like NFTs, except that they are not written into state data; they are written into block log stuff itself. And that's about the extent of what I know about what an inscription is. You know, I think it originates from Bitcoin, where that's all you really have is block log stuff. But of course, has since moved over to Ethereum and ecosystems, and now EOS EVM. So just for quick context, over the weekend, a new inscription entity, this is the limits of my understanding, ran their first sort of inscriptions event on EOS EVM and generated something like 20 million transactions in, I think, less than 24 hours. I think we have a blog post coming out about this that'll give some of the stats. So you'll be able to refer to that on the eosnetwork.com. But anyway, so lots of transactions. One interesting thing of note is that the network itself held up quite well. We did have run into some issues on like RPC and things like that on the EOS EVM side. Again, those will be detailed in the blog post that's coming. But the network itself held up well. This is my perspective. I don't run nodes. I am curious from a node operator perspective. Did the network hold up well?
I was halfway across the country, so I'm kind of glad that my nodes seem to have held up. I don't think anybody pinged me that our stuff was busted.
Yeah, the network held up pretty well, I would say. There was a few forks. We saw some complaints from Upland that their transactions were not getting through.
Was that just because the unapplied queue was so big?
Yeah, it was quite large.
Yeah.
I posted some charts in the EOS mainnet VP's channel. The other thing is it triggered is initiative to get all the BPs to upgrade to 405, which is in progress. So some BPs were still on 3.x, and obviously 4.x pushes blocks out first versus transactions. So trying to get everybody on 4.x. So I believe we now have 11 or 12 BPs who have at least some nodes on 405. So this will continue as a push to get the node operators to upgrade infrastructure to layest stuff. So that was the main reason I wanted to bring this up, because I wanted to let the ENF know that 405 is, it was released last week and it's being pushed into the environment. So this is good.
One thing I'm curious about is that prior to this event, the tone on like resources has been that, excuse me, that net is generally irrelevant, and CPU is like mostly all that matters from a resource perspective.
Well, that's what users are built for, because the net parameters are like you
Right.
can do whatever.
But my understanding of inscriptions, which is quite limited and very likely wrong, but I'm going to go with it because it's all I have, is that likely the CPU element is negligible, and it's really just transaction bandwidth, that is potentially that they're contributing to. And so I'm just curious whether that potentially, let's say that inscriptions were running all day, every day, and we just, man, all of a sudden having issues. And we just constantly had, tens of millions of transactions a day from a single source, right?
It would blow up our history like the EOS days, I guess, right?
Was that 3 days ago? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So
Friday, I think. Yeah.
Friday, Saturday.
I'll say this.
I posted an image of like what we noticed, because we did hear that someone was saying like some exchanges were behind or were not allowing withdrawals. So we're looking a bit at the stats, and we noticed like the net was going wild with mainly EOS EVM push TX.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. And that's what I was going to say. I've actually noticed some starting off with this IBC solution, but then obviously as you get into anything that's got more data smashed in there, it's never been an issue for 7 years to have net. I mean, you had like 0.1 coins and you had enough net to do anything you ever wanted. And now a lot of people are getting zinged that now something actually might be using a decent chunk of text.
And that's a silent killer.
Correct. And so it's kind of, we've conditioned everybody, and even some chains have kind of gotten rid of it being a separate knob. It's all kind of rolled together, right? But for the sake of the argument, it is interesting that for the first time, I'd say in about 7 years, where net has really started to kind of catch some people because you've got systems that are more heavily using it. And be careful if you don't restrict it, that you could potentially, crush, a lot of the architecture with just data, not so much transactions, just data.
Yeah.
I mean, the network bandwidth was like, I don't know, quadruple the normal on the weekend.
Yeah. I mean, I saw it
the
definitely
peer-to-peer
spike.
traffic. I didn't check. I mean, I just looked at our BP nodes as a collective. EOS Wax, Telos, all those together, and it was more than double. But Wax is quite a bit higher than EOS normally, so I don't know what the calculation is for EOS. But yeah, so people were not prepared with enough bandwidth to just handle all the transaction throughput. That was a problem. So we had one BP with that issue. I believe that has been since resolved. So
yeah, it went from kind
because
of a normal.
the OC is going to handle the CPU spike, but it's not going to handle the net accumulation.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the stats on our BP during that time, I mean, the product got up to about twice the normal utilization, which isn't crazy, wasn't pegged out or anything, but I mean, you can definitely see it handling more transactions. And then the net is, yeah, I mean, I'd say easily 4 times as much. It was getting up to about 4 to 5 megabit for one BP node to stay in sync.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's only got 2 or 3 internal private peers, because I use that to then branch out to all the other peers.
But I mean, the good thing is, the network stayed up, and even without our block relay nodes running, because I removed all those a while ago. So the fact that the network was running with just node EOS 5, basically, because our infrastructure is all 5.0 except the BP node. So it stood up to all that. So
yeah, it looks like our public peer-to-peer went from about 100 megabit to 200 megabit a second. So you could definitely, because of course that's exponential as per peer. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse. But
you're going to be limited a lot of times by your upload in many places. So you
Additionally,
might consume it, but
yeah, additionally, even our APIs saw pretty substantial spikes, whereas normally it's about 10 megabit of data getting ripped out of the APIs. I mean, it was jumping all the way up to 20, 25 megabit a second of pure text API traffic. So, but it handled it. I mean, you just had to have the capacity to be able to do it. You know, if you only had a 200 megabit connection, you were slaughtered. If you had 100 million hits a week, also too.
Yeah, I mean, luckily our BP nodes have the gigabit connection, so we're good.
Yeah.
Are there any lessons learned or next steps or anything coming out of this experience that we need to consider or have future discussions on?
Net pricing, I guess, is the only thing.
More EVM. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just said net pricing.
Net pricing, yeah.
Making it expensive. I was gonna say more EVM nodes. I think there's only a few, right? I mean, yeah. Not that this particular. I mean, all of them would have succumbed to the same issue, you'd assume, but that in itself is another thing I see mentioned a lot. You know.
Yeah, I mean, we're running an EVM node, but it's not public, so it was fine.
It was only a load problem. It didn't like jam up the index or the services with it. It really
didn't get
was
any
just
alerts from monitoring, so it seemed fine.
You know, normally like Hyperion, I mean, to beat on Hyperion, when you would see a massive influx of traffic like that and really, you know, overwhelm it, it would blow up the indexer and really jam up the back end of it. Not even so much just like everything here was just an excessive amount of traffic on top of it.
Yeah, but the
Hyperion
other thing is
would jam up. Yeah,
we're running ship in irreversible mode, so you know any of those forks were, you know, so our EOS EVM is slightly behind because we're not running the latest stuff, so that obviously helps.
I think, but it's just a raw amount of data typically that really. I mean, anyway, but yeah, so it didn't actually kill the ingesting because of the load.
But what's interesting too is that like long-term potential repercussions. So again, if this happened every day, all day, and they're, taking it to its logical extreme, there's multiple different entities doing the same type of thing, right? The cost of storing block log, sort of going back to that would certainly become even more of a factor to work out. But
yeah, I can look and see. I don't know how much it really increased the. Oh, I normally grow. Yeah, it was about 3 times the block log, 4 times the block log that ended up getting generated out of that. So a substantial increase in size of the log. Nothing really compared to wax. That's about a normal day on wax.
Yeah.
Well, EOS did jump above wax over the weekend on blocktivity. It had been a long time, I think, since EOS had been above.
Potentially, wax. I could see that. I mean,
it was. We were north of 20 million transactions a day, so we were substantially above wax there for a while. We're back down below it now, actually down below Tron as well, but there for a little bit. For over the weekend, it was exciting.
Yep.
Exciting in quotes.
Yeah. All right.
Well, in the bottlenecks, you guys were talking about bottlenecks there. FYI, the bottlenecks that we saw was the miners, like that the ENF was running, were not handling the load, so they scaled some of those up. And then the RPC nodes, they scaled it up, but they were running it on, fairly low end AWS servers, and so they increased some of those and they scaled them horizontally. So
amateurs.
Yeah, exactly. So there's ways, that certainly there's lessons learned that are going to be applied. So next time this happens, it should hopefully run even smoother than this time. There was a bug, that we hit as well that got fixed, and so it was a good. it was a good exercise. I think there's some people in the community saying that ENF actually did it. I think we'd been better prepared if that was true. So, but yeah, we learned a lot over the weekend. It was a very busy weekend, so pretty exciting.
All right. Well, I said 11 minutes. It has been 14 minutes. So we're going to end here, but thanks everybody for participating in the discussion. Really interesting stuff this week, and I'll see you next week.
All right.
I think that would be the 20th. Okay, I will message in the Node Operators channel. I assume we'll do one next week, but I'll message and we'll talk about whether we have, sufficient participation to do one next week. So, all right. Goodbye, everyone.